Welcome to Dream Story Sleep, your quiet companion, a gentle space where old stories softly unfold, carried on a voice that drifts like time itself. Here in this tranquil room, no harsh lights, no hurried sounds, just peaceful stillness. Only a steady voice, a comforting whisper from a timeless place. And now, allow your mind to gently settle. We'll simply begin a quiet journey through distant memories. There's no need to rush, no need to actively recall. Just listen and let everything softly fade, quite naturally. Should this video bring you a sense of peace or quiet comfort, please consider a gentle like, a soft subscribe, and share a comment to let us know when you listen and how it felt for you. Your quiet presence and kind words truly nurture this space. And so now, as always, we gently ease into a night of peaceful rest.
Who drank wine in medieval European society? In medieval European society, wine was not merely a beverage. It was a symbol of status, a testament of faith, a subtle boundary between the social classes, divided by land, doctrine, and deprivation. The seemingly simple question, who drank wine in the Middle Ages, actually opens up an entire map of layered society. In the pale light filtering through the stone windows of a monastery, or beneath the smoke-stained rafters of a peasant's home, the wine cup reflected not just the color of grapes, but the rigid hierarchy of the age. The nobility drank wine, that much is certain, but not just any wine was worthy of their tables. Barrels from Bordeaux, Burgundy, or the Rhine Valley, carefully selected, transported by water, and sealed with red wax, were their pride. On long oak tables, thick with carvings and time, candlelight flickered through thick glass goblets, and the wine was poured with deliberate grace. Each cup was a statement. The gentle bitterness, the lingering sweetness, it wasn't meant to quench thirst. It was to proclaim, I drink because I can, and I choose only the finest. In feasts that lasted from dusk well into the night, wine was the third instrument, alongside music and conversation, that orchestrated the atmosphere of power. Sometimes, wine wasn't just consumed, but used to rinse hands before eating, a luxurious act demonstrating excess. Nobles never drank in silence. They clinked glasses to make music. They poured for each other as a gesture of refined manners. And when a glass stood empty, it was the signal for the next round of discourse to begin. Monks also drank wine, but differently. In the solemn darkness of the monastery, wine was not display, but ritual. Every drop placed into the chalice symbolized the blood of Christ. In Mass, when the priest raised the cup before the stone altar, it was no longer merely wine. It was a sacred presence. Monastic orders like the Benedictines, Cistercians, and Augustinians not only used wine for sacraments, they cultivated grapes, recorded methods, and preserved yeast strains, safeguarding a piece of divine inheritance in earthen vessels. On cold days, monks were permitted a little wine to stay warm. Simple meals, bread, vegetable broth, and a diluted cup of wine formed a life of austerity, but order. Ancient ledgers even detail wine allotments. A cantor might receive 2/3 of a cup, a gardener a full measure. Even in sacred grounds, wine served as a subtle unit of rank and role. As for the peasantry, did they drink wine? Yes, but not in the same way. For them, wine was a luxury. The best grapes were sent to the church or sold to the wealthy. What remained, overripe fruit, crushed skins, or the lees from pressing, were fermented again, often twice or thrice, into a weak sour drink called piquette. This wasn't strong enough to intoxicate, but enough to mask the murky taste of well water. Often it was their only option, since clean water was never a guarantee in medieval villages. Peasants drank wine during meals, but not for pleasure. They drank to endure. Sometimes an entire family shared a single ceramic jug. No individual cups, no rituals, no music, only the sound of ladles hitting the bottom and the slow glances across a bowl of barley gruel. Wine, in that way, became a mirror, not just of taste, but of social structure. People could live close, yet drink in worlds apart. In an age where light was rare, the right to lift a cup and what it held was a potent symbol of real inequality. And curiously, within that disparity, wine still connected distant lives with one shared, deeply human moment, the warmth in the throat and the silence that follows the first sip.
How did the aristocracy enjoy wine? When we talk about wine in medieval society, the first image that comes to mind isn't vineyards or wooden barrels, but rather the long banquet table in a castle's great hall. There, amidst the glimmering light of hundreds of candles and the gentle strumming of stringed instruments, wine wasn't just poured into glasses. It was placed at the center of social rituals, the art of living, and political power. For the medieval aristocracy, wine appreciation was a multi-layered act, combining sight, smell, taste, and social status. From the 12th to the 15th century, owning fine wine was a clear sign of belonging to the ruling class. But beyond mere ownership, the aristocracy developed a series of unwritten norms for wine appreciation, subtle rules that outsiders found difficult to imitate, even with the material means. A prime example was the use of crystal glasses. While lower classes often used ceramic or pewter mugs, the nobility used hand-blown clear glass goblets, sometimes with silver-plated or gemstone-studded stems. The glass was not just a container, but a statement of aesthetics and wealth. But glasses alone weren't enough. Wine for the aristocracy often came from renowned regions like Bordeaux, Burgundy, or even from special barrels aged in prestigious monasteries such as Cluny or Citeaux. These batches of wine were not sold in regular markets, but through private transactions, often documented with wax-sealed notes. The story of a bottle's origin sometimes mattered more than the quality of the wine itself. It carried prestige, history, and political credibility. Aristocratic banquets weren't simply for eating and drinking. They were a stage for demonstrating character, connections, and power. At the start of the feast, servants would pour wine from silver urns into each glass according to rank. the host first, then honored guests, followed by other noble gentlemen. The pourer had to stand at a specific angle, bow, and use both hands. Whether wine spilled was a criterion for judging the family's training and honor. Some noble families were so famous that one could deduce their identity simply by observing how wine was poured. As the wine was enjoyed, words became more refined. Aristocrats didn't talk about the weather or harvests. They spoke of the wine's color, its tannins, the scent of oak, and the lingering finish. A man was considered educated if he could accurately identify the grape varietal, region, vintage, and aging method from just a small sip. These wine critiques sometimes turned into cultural debates, lasting longer than the banquet itself. A less noticed aspect was the role of wine in aristocratic politics. Many treaties, transactions, or marriages began with the right glass of wine. Some bottles were reserved specifically for meetings with foreign envoys as an unspoken affirmation of status and meticulous preparation. Historical records even show that during negotiations to resolve land disputes between two lords, the type of wine chosen for the meal could influence attitudes and final decisions. The wine-tasting space was also meticulously designed. Banquet halls featured fireplaces, thick carpets, ancestral portraits, and along the walls shelves held wine vessels, each with a unique shape, often marked with the family crest. Each time a wine was opened, a servant would announce its region, vintage, and origin. This was a familiar ritual, creating solemnity and demonstrating the host's connoisseurship. Not just men, noble women also participated in wine culture. In some banquet descriptions, noble ladies are mentioned for their ability to distinguish white wines from the Loire region from sweet wines of the Moselle. Some ladies even kept private diaries, recording their impressions of various wines. This is proof that wine was also part of the education and self-affirmation of female intellect in feudal society. Wine didn't just exist at banquets. It was also present in the daily lives of the aristocracy, as part of a light lunch, in the study, or sometimes a small glass before bed. Some nobles even built private underground wine cellars where temperature and humidity were kept stable year-round, guarded by soldiers, and entry and exit lists were meticulously recorded like a family's golden ledger. And above all, the art of wine appreciation lay in attitude. A true aristocrat never drank too quickly. They took small sips, holding the wine in their mouth for a few seconds to savor it, then swallowed slowly. They didn't speak too loudly or laugh boisterously when raising a glass. Every gesture, from how they brought the glass to their lips to how they looked at their drinking companions, exuded restraint and composure. In a world where everything was standardized by status and honor, the way one appreciated wine was a reflection of their inner self and social maturity. As night fell and the banquet ended, the last glasses of wine were often not for drinking, but to be placed on the table as a toast, or sometimes a farewell. In the fading light of candles, as the music receded and only the quiet footsteps leaving the great hall remained, the aftertaste of wine lingered, not just in the throat, but in the minds of the guests. And that was the art. the art that the aristocracy created around a fermented grape beverage to transform it into a timeless symbol. What does wine mean to monks, and what is the holy chalice in Mass? Amidst the cold stone walls of medieval monasteries, where time seemed to slow and all sounds seemed to melt into the early morning bells, wine was present not as a beverage, but as a sacred part of religious life. To the monk, wine was not a ferment for pleasure or socializing, but the ultimate symbol of faith, the blood of Christ poured out for humanity. In the ritual of the Holy Mass, the chalice of wine is the center of the entire ceremony. When the priest raised the silver chalice before the stone altar, amidst the incense and flickering candlelight, he was not just holding up a wine vessel, but raising the very image of divine sacrifice. That was the moment reenacting the Last Supper, where Jesus said, "This is my blood, the blood of the new covenant." And from the Middle Ages, that ritual was repeated, unchanged, despite wars, epidemics, or poverty, like a thread connecting humanity to God through every drop of deep red wine. For that reason, wine was cared for and preserved by monasteries as a sacred part of canon law. Many large monastic orders, such as the Benedictine, Cistercian, and Augustinian, not only celebrated Mass daily, but also personally cultivated grapes, tended vineyards, made wine, and preserved it. In the surviving records, the wine production process of the monastery can be seen meticulously documented, from selecting grape varieties to monitoring harvests to fermentation and storage techniques. Some monastic orders even developed underground cellar systems where temperatures were always stable, helping preserve wine for many years without losing flavor. Unlike the aristocracy who drank wine to assert status, monks approached wine with temperance and reverence. In many monasteries, drinking wine outside of Mass was also permitted, but usually to a very limited extent. A monk reciting prayers might be allowed a quarter of a glass per day. Those doing heavy work in the garden might be allowed half a glass. Wine at meals was only diluted with water, and intoxication was not permitted. Every sip was taken with careful consideration, as if each drop carried a part of sacred responsibility. Not only used in rituals and meals, wine was also a part of monastic medicine. Monks used wine to extract herbs, make sedatives, disinfectants, and in many cases as a catalyst to bring scripture into daily life. Ancient manuscripts record dozens of recipes. Wine mixed with lavender for insomniacs, wine boiled with honey and cinnamon for those with weakness, and diluted wine for cleaning wounds. However, the most special thing was the monks' attitude towards wine. They did not view wine as a privilege, but as a responsibility. In ascetic orders, wine was only used on major feast days or when pilgrims visited. They believed that each time they raised the chalice, it was a remembrance of sacrifice, and therefore it must be drunk with deep gratitude and a humble spirit. Some large monasteries also organized training for those specialized in wine production, often an older, experienced monk, called a cellarer or custos vini. This person was responsible for preserving the entire wine cellar, monitoring the quality of each batch, keeping a diary, and distributing wine according to regulations. This role was so important that in many records, when a monastery was attacked or plundered, the monks often chose to protect the wine cellar before the library, because they believed wine was the blood of monastic life. Wine also served as a bridge between the church and the secular world. Many monasteries produced wine for sale to outsiders, using the profits to maintain charitable activities, feed the poor, or maintain facilities. However, the barrels of wine used for Mass were always kept separate, aged from pure grape varieties, unadulterated, and without added spices. This distinction was to preserve the absolute purity of the religious ritual. Finally, it can be said that throughout the Middle Ages, if the aristocracy made wine luxurious, the monks made it sacred. On one side was the table of power, on the other was the silent altar. On one side was the engraved glass goblet, on the other was the silver chalice worn by time. But between these two worlds, wine retained its original essence, unchanged, unadulterated, quietly seeping into every scripture page, every stained glass window, and every long ringing bell from the high monastery tower.
Did commoners drink wine? Yes, they did, but they drank in a different way, very different from the nobility, diluted drops of wine. For the majority of the population in medieval society, wine was not a symbol of power or sacred ritual. It was a necessity, crude, humble, and frequently diluted. In small villages nestled deep in the forests or along dusty trails, wine quietly appeared at dinner, in the kitchen well, in clay pots placed behind the hearth, as a part of survival, not enjoyment. Unlike the aristocracy, who were served by servants with silver-embossed glass goblets, commoners drank wine from simple wooden cups, sometimes dried coconut shells or cracked earthenware bowls passed down through generations. The wine they had, if it could even be called wine, was rarely clear, rarely fragrant, and almost always diluted. This beverage was called piquette, made from grape pomace left after the first pressing, with water added, and fermented a second or third time. The result was a light, sour, low-alcohol fermented drink, enough to mask the smell. Farmers did not have their own vineyards. They worked in the vineyards of monasteries or lords, and were sometimes paid a small portion with the very grape pomace they had pressed. In some regions, each household was entitled to a jug of excess grape juice at the end of the season. That was the moment when the whole village gathered. Mothers scooped wine with ladles. Fathers carefully sipped, and children sat watching, waiting for permission to touch their lips to the clay cup. Unlike the polite rituals of the upper class, wine drinking among commoners was communal and practical. At dinner, often just barley porridge, dark bread, and a few dried onions, a jug of wine was placed in the middle of the table. Each person poured for themselves, without hierarchy, without invitation.
The stories told around the wine jug were often about the harvest, the coming winter, the newborn pig, or the wounded soldier returning from the border. Wine helped warm the body, made dry bread easier to swallow, and helped forget the cold. However, even in that roughness, the common people developed their own drinking culture. Some villages had a tradition of keeping a special jug of Piquette for weddings or funerals. In some places, whenever a child was born, a portion of wine was stored until the child's wedding day. Even though it was cheap, sour wine, it was still exchanged with respect and its own symbolism. On festive occasions, especially during the grape harvest or Christmas, people often mixed wine with herbs, honey, and spices, creating a simple version of Hippocras. Heated in an iron pot, the wine diffused its aroma throughout the thatched cottage. That was when folk songs echoed, circle dances appeared, and elders told fairy tales by the fire. Wine, in that moment, was not just for drinking, but was the conduit of memory and community. It is hard to imagine that at the same time, a few hundred miles away, the nobility were enjoying expensive Burgundy by stone fireplaces, or monks were raising the holy chalice in the chapel. But in the world of commoners, wine, even if just a faint shadow, still seeped into every moment of life. Although they did not have the means to choose grape varieties or knowledge of tannins, they understood one thing clearly. Every drop of wine was the result of hard labor, of the harvest, and of survival. It cannot be denied that for medieval commoners, wine was a luxury. But at the same time, it was also a symbol of faith, of hope for a milder winter, and for a future where their children could drink better wine than their parents ever had. In the small earthen house, under the faint lamplight, they raised their cups, not to assert status, not to pray, but simply to say to each other, "We are still here." And it was there, in that nameless silence, that the commoner's wine became a part of history, not glamorous, not sacred, but authentic. It left its mark on the chapped lips of the mother, in the calloused hands of the father, and in the memories of children who grew up with the sour scent of ferment mixed with the smell of hearth ash. It was the wine of memory, the wine of reality, and the wine of hope, even if brewed only from what remained. What was special about medieval wine? You stepped down a stone staircase, just wide enough for 2 steady feet, feeling the cold air emanating from the earth, and a sour, pungent, damp aroma filling your lungs like the smell of thyme. Below is the wine cellar of an ancient monastery, where stone walls sweat and the ceiling is low and moss-covered, while a row of oak barrels lie dormant like hibernating animals. Here there are no dazzling electric lights, no noisy machinery, only the steady drip of water and the creaking of old wood under the pressure of time, creating a tranquil, sacred space. The wine stored here is nothing like the bottle you see at the supermarket. It has no glossy labels, no discreet corks, and is not bottled in elegant glass. Instead, it is scooped directly with a wooden ladle, poured from barrel to glass, and all its characteristics are remembered by memory, by experience passed down from generation to generation. Medieval wine often looked cloudy, not clear like glass, and had a deep red, earthy red color, sometimes slightly brown like smoke-stained stone walls. White wine was lighter, slightly yellow, sometimes even looking like rice water, reflecting the lack of modern filtering processes. When you brought the glass to your nose, its scent was not always pleasant by today's standards. It could be strong like tanned leather, or slightly sour like long-fermented sauerkraut, but sometimes it could emit a gentle fragrance like sun-dried honey, depending on the yeast strain and aging conditions. When it touched your lips, the taste of the wine was not the sweetness of ripe fruit, but a sharp, tart, vibrant, and rustic sensation, like biting into young bark or breathing the first winter wind, carrying the raw and wild essence of nature. They drank wine when it was young, because old wine often turned sour and could become vinegar, ruining everything. So people always drank it when it was new, alive, and still possessed its primitive wildness. Wine was pressed from unevenly ripened grape clusters, without any rigorous filtering processes, so grape solids remained in the barrels, and thick sediment settled at the bottom. This sediment was not discarded. The poor were often given this sediment to cook or dilute, making the most of every bit of product from the vineyard. Since each season brought a different harvest, no 2 years were alike in terms of weather conditions, grape quality, and wine flavor also varied. In sunny years, the wine was often sharper and stronger. In rainy years, it was lighter and had lower alcohol content. And in years of severe pest infestation, the wine could be as bitter as mugwort leaves, bearing the harsh mark of nature. The types of aging barrels also played an important role in shaping the wine's flavor. Some monasteries aged wine in pine barrels, giving it a distinctive pine resin smell. Others used old oak barrels, leaving a smell of wet ash or dry grass, each type of barrel leaving a distinct mark on the wine, creating a unique diversity. Wine was also sometimes infused with other flavorings to enhance its efficacy or taste: pepper, cinnamon, cloves, honey, or dried orange peel. Depending on the intended use, some wines were concocted to be drunk when tired, some to treat coughs, some to aid deeper sleep, and some to combat the cold of winter. In monasteries, wine recipes were carefully recorded on parchment sheets in black ink, accompanied by Latin annotations, and only the oldest, most experienced monks were allowed to keep the originals, ensuring the transmission of the secret. Farmers, without the means to own expensive oak barrels, often stored wine in earthenware jars, clay pots, or ceramic vessels. These containers were placed in warm areas of the house, such as behind the stove or near the hearth, and sometimes the lid was just a makeshift wet cloth, allowing the wine some contact with the air. Farmers' wine was not drunk for intoxication, but mainly to replace drinking water, as well water at that time was often unclean, with a muddy or mossy smell. Diluted wine helped mask those unpleasant odors, and also aided easier digestion of dry bread or cold porridge, becoming an essential part of the daily meal. In the banquets of the nobility, wine was poured from elegant silver ewers. The pourer stood bowing, carefully not letting a single drop spill, pouring according to rank from the host to the honored guests, demonstrating solemnity and social hierarchy. Meanwhile, at the monastery, wine was slowly raised during Mass, candlelight reflecting its deep red, blood-like color. the entire church immersed in absolute silence, with the faint aroma of wine and echoing prayers. And in humble peasant homes, wine lay quietly in clay pots. Children were not allowed to drink, but were allowed to smell the aroma and listen to adults tell stories around the wine pot, passing down stories and memories from generation to generation. Each type of medieval wine carried the imprint of a specific weather, a distinct harvest, a deep memory, and a lost life. People clearly remembered the year it rained a lot, and the grapes weren't sweet, and the wine that year would taste slightly tart, and they named it orally, without needing to write it down, because wine didn't need a name when the drinker remembered it. Wine didn't need to tell stories, because each sip was a story conveyed through taste and smell. And medieval wine, though imperfect by modern standards, was incredibly authentic. It was rough, perhaps a little sour, and still contained grape solids, but it carried the breath of fertile soil, of diligent peasant hands, of monastery bells echoing through centuries, and the warm smoke from commoners' kitchens. This was the wine of an era without complex machinery, without chemical intervention, without seals, only diligent working hands and the patience of time. And when drinking such wine, one did not just drink a mere liquid, but drank years of history, drank all that had lived, been lost, and waited to be remembered, creating a profound and meaningful experience of a bygone era.
Why was medieval wine low in alcohol, poorly filtered, and easily spoiled? When you imagine a medieval grape harvest day, with the scent of ripe grapes wafting through the air, the ground sticky with juice, sleeves stained with pomace, flies buzzing around full wooden barrels, and the sunlight slanting across tiled roofs, you are envisioning a crude but deeply indigenous wine-making process. The wine created under these conditions had very specific characteristics: low alcohol content, poorly filtered, and highly perishable. The winemaking process in the Middle Ages began with pressing grapes using manual methods. People used their feet to stump, or employed heavy stones and wrapped cloth with both hands to squeeze juice from the grape clusters. The grape juice slowly flowed down brick channels, then was collected in wooden barrels that were not properly rinsed or cleaned according to modern standards. It was from these rudimentary conditions that wine began to form. The key difference of medieval wine lay in the fermentation process. Unlike today, with tightly controlled industrial yeast cultures, wine back then relied solely on natural wild yeast. This type of yeast existed everywhere, on fruit skins, in the air, on the hands of grape pickers, and even in the damp cracks of stones where wine barrels were placed. The inability to control these yeast strains brought both great fortune and great risk. Sometimes the random combination of wild yeast strains would produce a specially delicious wine, with a unique flavor that could not be replicated. But often, unwanted yeast strains developed, spoiling entire barrels of wine, emitting unpleasant odors like boiled cabbage or other undesirable flavors. Another easily noticeable characteristic of medieval wine was the lack of thorough filtration. Winemakers at that time did not have fine enough cloth, filter paper, or activated carbon like today. Therefore, the finished wine was often cloudy, with small sediment particles suspended within. Even a thin film might float on the surface, looking like an oil slick on bone broth.
This not only affected the aesthetics, but was also one of the reasons why the wine spoiled more easily. Unremoved sediment particles and microorganisms would continue to be active, changing the quality of the wine over time. Wine was aged and stored in dark places, such as stone cellars, old hearths, or corners of thatched houses. These places were often chosen because they had fewer rats and avoided harsh light, but they lacked temperature and humidity stability. In overly cold winters, yeast could hibernate, causing the fermentation process to stagnate or be incomplete. In overly hot summers, yeast could act up, becoming overactive, causing the wine to boil over, overflow, and easily change flavor due to uncontrolled secondary fermentation or the growth of harmful bacteria. The fact that no one knew about thermometers, pH, or precise sugar levels meant that every decision was based on sight, smell, intuition, and experience. The absence of these scientific tools led to many errors in the production and preservation process. Furthermore, medieval wine typically had a low alcohol content, usually only 5 to 7%. There were many reasons for this. Insufficient sugar in grapes. Grapes were grown under crude cultivation conditions not optimized to achieve the highest sugar content. Weak yeast and incomplete aging. Wild yeast might not be strong enough to convert all sugar into alcohol, or fermentation stopped prematurely due to environmental conditions. Low alcohol content, while enough to warm the throat and provide a sense of relaxation, was not sufficient to act as an effective preservative. This was a key factor in why wine at that time did not last long. Another factor contributing to wine's perishability was the limited packaging methods. No one bottled in glass, no one sealed with labels or tight corks like today. Wine was typically stored in large earthen jars or wooden barrels, and the mouth of the jar was often only covered with a loosely tied wet cloth. This allowed the wine direct contact with the air, and the air was full of sunlight, mold, and bacteria. This contact caused the wine to easily change smell and taste, much like milk left out by the stove, quickly turning sour and spoiling. In the context of medieval ages, not only wine, but everything was perishable, due to the lack of modern preservation methods such as refrigerators, purified salt, or airtight glass jars. Bread molded quickly in damp spring. Fish without salt would spoil within a day. Hung meat that wasn't smoked would rot overnight. Turnips had to be buried underground to be kept from autumn until February. Therefore, everything needed to be eaten soon, drunk quickly. Leftovers were often recooked, dried, buried, or discarded. In a world full of risks and scarcity, nothing was wasted. Therefore, wine, though cherished, was also not wasted. They drank wine like drinking the morning light, quickly, lightly, quietly, before it disappeared. Wine spoilage was a weekly occurrence. The barrel smell could change, the wine color would become cloudy, and a pungent vinegar smell would rise. But no one screamed, no one regretted. The winemaker simply nodded and poured it onto the ground, an act of accepting nature. They understood that in a world without machinery, time was the greatest yeast, a yeast that could not be controlled. And anything that lived too long, especially natural products like wine, would also transform into something else according to the laws of creation. Medieval wine was not durable by modern standards, but it was real. It was a moment preserved in a wooden barrel, a fleeting moment of flavor and emotion, which would then be lost. And that was also how they lived, how they remembered past harvests, and how they accepted the impermanence of all things.
What is the role of wine in medieval society? On a winter holiday, when the church bells chimed in the distance, when kitchen smoke curled up from thatched roofs, and the smell of wine mulled with cinnamon wafted through cracked wooden doors, that's when you understood wine was not just for drinking. It was something waited for, something kept, and something given with both hands. Wine was a language in a world not yet accustomed to widespread writing. In small villages without letters, people welcomed each other with a glass of early-season wine and bid farewell with aged sour wine at year's end. A wine jug placed in the middle of a table was an unwritten promise, a period in an unnamed conversation, a soft boundary between hostility and familiarity. In the noble council, wine was poured according to an unspoken hierarchy. The person at the head of the table was poured first. Late guests would not receive a glass, and if poured a second time, it meant you were invited to stay. In the monastery refectory, wine was allocated by roll. A scribe received half a glass, a cook 1 glass, and a grape grower sometimes received extra if the harvest was good. Wine not only divided, but also connected. A wedding ceremony without wine was a soulless event, a funeral without wine an incomplete farewell. In the cathedral, wine was raised with trembling hands as the priest recited the consecration. The entire church was silent as stone, with only the light, the grape ferment, and the faith of those kneeling, believing that in that glass was blood, a promise, something that transcended hunger and cold. Wine did not smell of flowers, but of memories. In years of poor harvest, the wine was diluted, and people spoke little. In years of war, the wine was strong, and people clinked glasses without smiling. In years of peace news, wine flowed like a small stream beside the wooden table. Wine was also currency. A barrel could be traded for 2 sheep, 3 jars for a wooden cart, a glass for peace of mind from a passer-by. In wealthy homes, wine was a symbol. The wine barrel was placed in the living room with candles lit beside it, a red wax seal on the cork, and when guests arrived, the servant poured very, very slowly, so that time could pass through that glass unhurriedly. In poor homes, wine was a natural ritual, an earthenware cup passed from father to son, from wife to husband, from neighbor to neighbor, accompanied by a nod or whispered phrase, "It's been a long time." At harvest feasts, wine was shared equally. No one had more than another because everyone had a part in that harvest, and the clinking of glasses was the earth's joyous sound. During fasting seasons, wine was put away, placed in a dark spot. No one touched it, for it was the silent season of the ferment, like a person having to abstain from speaking to hear themselves more clearly. Wine was not merely a beverage, it was an invisible fabric weaving the social network. It was present where people needed a common understanding, a common breath, a common memory. Not everyone could make wine, but everyone could receive a glass,
and when that glass was offered, it was a greeting, a sign, a bridge. It went from the hands of the grape farmer, to the hands of the praying monk, to the hands of the city gate guard, and to the banquet table of an empress. In each place it transformed, yet retained one essence, the scent of sharing. It helped people bridge silence, bridge distance, and enter a quiet zone of mutual understanding. Where words were insufficient, where paper and pen were a luxury, where there was only the ferment and a gaze. The role of wine was not to be poured, but to preserve a moment, a relationship, a ritual, something that could not be named by any other language other than its very presence.
Wine as a commodity, diplomatic tool, and symbol of power. So when you step into a cold afternoon in a stone castle, light slanting through stained glass windows, on the table, an inlaid wooden box, and inside, not gold, not a handwritten letter, but a velvet-wrapped bottle of wine, sealed with red wax. Wine, not just for drinking, but for giving, for exchanging, for entrusting with meaning. Lords sent wine to each other before every land negotiation, before the marriage of their children, or before a truce. Wine was an invitation without words, a hand extended without a handshake, the first step on an unopened path. A good barrel of wine is better than words because it lives longer than letters. It traveled through lands that didn't speak the same language, but everyone knew how to uncork it and pour it with reverence. During diplomatic missions, people carried wine. Wine from southern vineyards, wine the color of red earth. Wine was stored in jars etched with seals. Every drop was a part of the honor of the land where it was born. When envoys placed the wine jar on the table, they didn't speak much, just bowed and waited for the other party to pour it out, to taste it. If lips touched the glass, negotiations began. If put back, the door was closed. In old records, it is written that wine was used to reconcile. There is a faded ink line, sending 3 jars of sweet wine to apologize for the soldier who crossed the border. There was a letter sent with a barrel of wine, accompanied by a small piece of bread. This wine my mother once made. In some monasteries, copies of documents were wrapped with wine. When messengers traveled through the forest, they carried only a bag of wine to exchange for passage, because wine was a guarantee, an unwritten vow. When 2 villages disputed a border, the head of each side placed a barrel of wine on the council table. The side with the better-smelling wine had the right to speak first. The one whose wine had spoiled was not allowed to sit at the table. In the large library of the monastery, there was a handwritten section listing each type of wine that had been sent, including the recipient's name, feedback, color, smell, and poetic lines such as "the taste of the drought year, bitter as locust pods," "wine sent to my sister, hoping she forgives."
When a king sent wine to a rebel, it was not a gift, but a warning by aroma, that I still remember you, that this softness is temporary. Wine, sometimes a bribe, sometimes a gift, sometimes evidence. In court cases, people brought out wine jars with altered seals, barrels of watered-down wine, and the accusation began with the ferment. No seal was as valuable as a true jar of wine, because it contained memories not just of people, but of seasons, of the earth, of the sun. And people remembered that wine as they remembered seeing each other for the first time after a war. Wine did not speak, but was understood. Wine did not laugh, but made others soft. Wine did not demand, but was always offered first. In the royal treasury, wine was stored alongside maps, seals, and precious fabrics, because it was a tool of diplomacy, of alliances, of unspoken understanding, and of silence. You could walk a mile in the fog, holding a wine jar, and upon arriving, say nothing at all, just open the lid and set the glass down, because at that moment the world understood without another word.
Which regions consumed the most wine in medieval Europe? So when you step into a cold afternoon in Languedoc, the sunlight slanting onto red-tiled roofs and the smell of ripe grapes drifting through wooden door cracks is when you know wine isn't a luxury, but the breath of lunch. The South, where wine isn't just something poured, but the heartbeat of life. Each village had its own wooden barrel, each season its own fermenting aroma, each kitchen a cool spot to store earthenware jars. In France, from Bordeaux to Languedoc, red wine was thick like damp earth, white wine fragrant like roasted lemon peel. Wine was pressed by foot, poured with a wooden ladle, and drunk under grape-covered eaves. You might see a woman carrying a clay pot to the well, scooping water to wash the wine jar. Children sit nearby, peeling leftover grapes. The husband walks by, hands stained with pomace, smiling without a word. In the monastery, wine was aged in cold stone, but in the village, wine was buried in the earth, next to onions and potatoes, because the earth kept it still, cool, and hidden, and those jars of wine were opened on harvest day, on a child's birth, or on days when there was nothing else to drink. In Italy, Tuscany was covered in sun and grapes. Wine was stored in round, straw-wrapped bottles, placed at the center of the dining table as an indispensable item. Sometimes wine was heated with egg yolks, sometimes just mixed with warm water for the elderly and frail. Each family had a habit. Some drank wine mixed with honey in the morning, some with a piece of cinnamon bark on a cold afternoon. Italians didn't call wine a drink, but a part of the meal. It sat between a piece of toasted bread and a plate of boiled white beans. It flowed through conversations and lingered in the silence at the end of the meal. In Spain, where the earth was red, the wind dry, and the sun intense, wine was dark like burnt bark, strong with a spicy finish, keeping warm throughout the winter night. Travelers carried leather flasks filled with wine, If cold, they took a mouthful and continued. If sad, they shared it with their companions. A mouthful of wine was sharing, kindness, a silent greeting. In roadside taverns, wine was poured into wooden cups, placed on stone tables without asking, because the innkeeper had already seen the dust of the road on your shoes. In some places, every morning began with the pop of a cork. Wine didn't have complex rituals, it just needed to be present and set the stage for everything else to happen. Wine was drunk as people breathed, because well water smelled of iron, because spring water was easily contaminated, because a little wine, diluted, slightly warm, was still better. Merchants transported wine from the south to the north on wooden ox carts through forests, over mountains. Wine barrels rattled with the rhythm of the wheels. Inside was the red color of the old harvest, the tartness of the faded sun. The north was cold, rainy, and foggy, making it difficult to grow grapes and ferment wine. So they had to wait for wine from the south. Wine arrived like letters, not frequently, but always eagerly awaited. In England, wine was a precious commodity, used at banquets. In Germany, wine was mixed with herbs, used in medicine. In the Netherlands, wine was sold in markets, placed in wooden jugs hung by ropes. In large markets, there were wine stalls from Spain. The seller poured it into a bronze spoon for tasting. The buyer tasted, then nodded, then paid with wool cloth or cast copper. Each barrel of wine was a moving block of memories, carrying the climate, the harvest, the care of the grower, and when it arrived, people poured it into glasses, raising them as if welcoming guests. When the weather started to get cold, when the wind from the north came over the pass, the people of the south would uncork old wine barrels by the hearth, sharing small sips as if sharing the light of days not long past. And wine reappeared as an unnamed habit. In every small village, every winding street, every sun-drenched courtyard, where every sip of wine was a whisper of the land that gave it birth.
Do you know which prominent grape-growing regions stood out during the Middle Ages? Bordeaux, Burgundy, Rhine. So when you step into a thin morning mist where the vineyard is still drenched in the night's dew, grape leaves sparkling like tiny mirrors in the sky, and the footsteps of the harvesters sound as light as breath, that's when you enter the land of wine. Each place a distinct scent, each place a unique voice. In Bordeaux, the gravelly soil, the wind from the sea drying every last drop of dew, the grapes plump and glowing with a deep purplish-black hue. The wine is rich, profound, and sturdy like an ancient city wall. The estates lie along the Garonne River. Each harvest, red wine overflows into wooden barrels, then is taken to the port, to the sea, to the world. The farmers here don't speak much. They just taste, then nod. Their wine needs no introduction. Just pour it and let the scent of the old earth speak for itself. In Burgundy, the sacred land of every vine row, people don't just grow grapes, but also cultivate memories. Each row has a name, each plot has a legend. Monastic orders from the 9th century began to mark this land. The climate changes with each hillside. The wind blows from the southeast, gentle enough not to scorch, cold enough to retain the aroma. Grapes are harvested by hand when the moon is closest to setting, without knives, placed in woven bamboo baskets, covered with maple leaves, carried down to stone cellars, aged in earthen jars, and a year later the wine is born, like an answer without a question. When you raise your glass, Burgundy wine is not rich, not strong, not heady, but it touches your memory in a place without a name. In Rhine, the river like a knife cutting through stone, summer grapes bask in the sun, winter leaves are covered in frost. The people of Rhine are tough, speak little, but their wine is smooth, sweet like a whisper in a chapel. Rhine white wine, pale yellow like the candlelight of a ceremony. The scent of wild flowers, ripe apples, dried pear skin. A small sip is the sensation of the river flowing in your mouth. Terroir is a sacred word in all three places. It is not just the soil, but the soul of the land. It is the slope of the hill, the direction of the sun, the thickness of the rock layer, the smell of grass in March, the taste of rain in June, the rhythm of the wind in September, and the wetness in the eyes of the grape picker that year. Terroir cannot be replicated. It is the signature of heaven and earth on the ferment. Each vineyard is a unique microcosm. The great wine regions don't just sell wine, but they sell harvests, they sell wind, they sell time. And the buyer doesn't buy what's poured into a glass, but buys a moment that cannot be recreated. Merchants came from Flanders, Genoa, London, placing orders before the season because they knew this year's grape aroma would never return. That barrel of wine would say what words could not. In the Bruges market there was a wine stall marked with a lightning grape symbol. In the port of Pisa, Bordeaux wine was stacked into wooden pyramids. On each barrel, the farm's symbol and the vintage year were carved. Each barrel of wine is an envelope. The smell is a greeting. The color of the wine is a voice, and the aftertaste is a handshake. From then on, wine drinkers became those who remembered the land. They closed their eyes and saw again the grape arbor, the damp kitchen, the old well, and the story was retold in colors. Each region is a voice in the choir. Bordeaux is deep, like a cello's bass. Burgundy is light, like an early morning bamboo flute. Rhine is clear, like a trembling harp string in the cathedral. Perhaps did wine make people's voices different? Bordeaux people spoke short, firm words, each like stone. Burgundy people told stories slowly, their eyes sad like twilight. Rhine people smiled little, but their gaze lit up. On a quiet afternoon, you stand in the cellar, hand touching the cork, then gently open it. The small pop sounds like a lark singing in a distant forest. Each vineyard is a song. Each barrel of wine is a temporary love song. Each glass of wine is a fermented dream. The drinker is one who steps into that forest with wide open ears and a heart that never stops singing.
Are you surprised that monasteries played a central role in wine production? So when you step into an early morning, dew still clinging to the stone ledge outside the courtyard,
the chapel bell just having finished its last chime, and behind the monastery a small door opens. Inside is a stone cellar, cold, with the damp smell of grapes, the light just a faint flicker from a half-burnt old candle, and the monk, holding a bunch of cast bronze keys, slowly descends step by step. This place not only holds wine, but also holds memories, holds harvests, holds whispered prayers. Throughout centuries, it was the monks who made wine, not out of passion for its fermented aroma, but out of faith, because wine was needed for the Mass, because the blood of Christ could not be diluted with well water. They cultivated grapes in the garden behind the monastery, following the lunar cycle, not the calendar. They knew the scent of the wind that signaled the rainy season, knew which soil held the sun longer, knew when to harvest simply by smelling. Grapes were pressed by hand or by stone. The grape juice flowed into earthenware jars, buried deep in the cellar, where no one entered except those who had taken a vow of silence. Wine was inspected before each Mass. The monk bowed his head, poured a drop into a silver spoon, smelled it slowly, as long as listening to the echoing bells, tasted it deliberately, as if reading a sacred book. The wine must not spoil, must not be cloudy, must not ferment incorrectly. If it did, they poured it out and fasted for 3 days. But if the wine was not fully consumed, they sold it to exchange for parchment, iron pens, herbs, salt, or even money to feed the poor. Monastery wine was renowned for its purity, because it was unadulterated, its aging time not shortened. Their wine was slow, aged, profound, and quiet, like the very place it was born. The Benedictine, Cistercian, Cluniac monks not only preserved faith, they preserved the terroir of each region they passed through, always leaving a vineyard behind and a chapel in front. They brought winemaking techniques from France to Italy to Germany. They meticulously recorded each pressing method, each aging period, and verbally passed down unwritten secrets. There were monastery wine barrels, carved with the names of saints, the year it was made, the last rainy day of that season. The lid was wrapped with linen cloth soaked in beeswax. Each time it was opened was a silent prayer. Monastery wine was not for feasting, but for remembrance, for keeping peace, for sitting together without needing to speak. In some ancient manuscripts, monks wrote down how they perceived a glass of wine. Smells like a cloak dried in the early winter sun. The aftertaste evokes the sound of morning bells in the misty dawn. In the monastery's storage, wine was placed next to books, next to ink jars, wax seals, and dried plant samples for medicine. Wine was not separated from knowledge, nor from the soul. Each time someone stepped into the cellar, they would see not a wine jar, but an unextinguished candle in the heart of the bottle. Each time someone drank a sip of that wine, they would feel that they were not just drinking, but being led by the hand to a place where light is preserved by stillness. Is the medieval wine production process interesting? Stepping into a vineyard in late autumn during the Middle Ages, You would see grape clusters heavy on the vines, their delicate skins shimmering under the sun like parchment. This was the starting point of a wine production journey elaborate and heavily reliant on the experience and intuition of the winemaker. The grape harvesting process in the Middle Ages was never rushed. People believed that harvesting at the right time was the key factor determining the wine's quality. Grapes picked too early would result in a bland, flavorless wine. Conversely, picking too late could make the wine too tart. Therefore, harvesting was done meticulously, often by hand or sometimes with crude wooden knives to cut each cluster. The harvesters would carefully select each grape, listening to the gentle, crisp sound of the skin when touched, and observing their color and plumpness. For them, grapes were not just fruit. They were the blood of the earth, to be respected. After harvesting, the grapes were gently placed into hand-woven wicker baskets. These baskets were then carried back to the pressing area on donkey back along bumpy, rocky dirt roads. Each step of the donkey created a gentle clinking sound as the grapes knocked against each other, as if preparing for the transformation to come. This rudimentary transportation process ensured that the grapes weren't excessively bruised before reaching the processing site. When the grapes arrived at the pressing area, typically a simple paved courtyard, they would be poured into a large stone or wooden trough. The most common pressing method at that time was foot pressing. Workers would use their bare feet to stomp on the grapes. The sound of pressing was the sound of juice spurting out, grape skins crushing, and the characteristic tart aroma of grapes beginning to rise, signaling that the fermentation process was about to begin. The grape juice would flow from the pressing trough into a lower trough, often lined with wood or cool stone to maintain a stable temperature. Importantly, they did not filter the grape juice and did not separate the skins. Everything, including the skins, seeds, and stems, was retained and fermented together. This was a significant difference compared to many modern wine production processes, but it was precisely this that created the deep color, tannins, and a characteristic part of medieval wine's flavor. Grape skins contained natural yeasts and compounds that create color and flavor, playing a crucial role in the primary fermentation process. After being pressed, the grape juice was collected into large earthenware jars, amphorae, or clay pots, or sometimes into carved niches within the cool cellars of monasteries or castles. They were sealed with wooden lids, fabric stoppers to keep out insects, and covered with ash or dry leaves to maintain stable temperatures and prevent excessive air exposure. The fermentation process relied entirely on natural yeasts present on the grape skins and in the air. Winemakers at that time did not have precise measuring tools like thermometers or alcohol content meters. They only had time, experience, and their senses. They tasted the wine every day, smelling the foam rising to the surface. When they saw a gentle fizz on the surface, it was a sign that fermentation was beginning. When it vigorously bubbled with a rustling sound, that was when the yeast was most active, converting sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. When the sour smell mellowed and the bubbling subsided, it was a sign that the yeast had completed its work and the fermentation process was pure. Fermentation times varied greatly. sometimes taking only 5 days, sometimes lasting up to 2 weeks, depending on natural conditions such as ambient temperature, sugar content in the grapes, and the type of natural yeast present. Sun, rain, and wind directly influenced this process, turning each vintage into a challenge and a surprise. After the basic fermentation process ended, the wine was scooped out with a wooden ladle and transferred to aging barrels. Most aging barrels were made of oak. Oak wood, before being made into barrels, was often lightly toasted to create characteristic flavor compounds, imparting subtle smoky, vanilla, or caramel notes to the wine. During aging, the wine would gradually permeate the wood grain, breathing with the wood through tiny pores on the barrel's surface, allowing a very small amount of oxygen to permeate, helping the wine mature and develop more complex flavors. The aging process was a test of patience. No one opened the barrel lid during aging, nor did anyone stir the wine. They simply waited. Aging time could be 1 month for young wines, consumed quickly, or extend up to 3 years for more special wines, stored for important occasions. The wine barrels were placed in the quietest areas of the house or cellar, cool, draft-free, and without direct light, ideal conditions for the wine to sleep and develop. Time was the final and most decisive ingredient. When the winemaker felt enough time had passed, they would open the barrel lid, scoop out a small amount of wine with a ladle, and pour it into a simple earthenware goblet. Then they would perform the ritual of assessment, smelling, tasting, and feeling. This was a moment of suspense and chance. If lucky, the result would be a wine with the desired flavor, perhaps a rich, sweet finishing wine, or one with unique nuances. If unlucky, the wine could turn into vinegar, spoil, or have an odd taste and had to be discarded. Because there were no thermometers to control fermentation temperature, no knowledge of bacteriology to control yeast and prevent contamination, everything depended entirely on accumulated experience over generations, on eyes to see color, nose to smell aroma, hands to feel consistency, and memories of previous harvests. They did not have modern sterilization methods. Tools and wooden barrels were only washed with natural spring water. Wooden barrels were reused for many years, carrying cracks, old smells, and even old yeast. It was these things that created the distinct, unique flavor of each house, each monastery, or each region, making medieval wine not just a beverage, but a unique product difficult to replicate. Every time a barrel of wine was opened, it was a gamble. Some barrels became rich, deeply sweet finishing wines. Some barrels were bland, like rice water. Still others were sour, but ironically perfectly suited the palate of the local people, favored for specific dishes. And so they accepted every outcome, because for them wine came from the risks of nature, from the wind, from the bounty of the earth and the weather. It was the direct result of human hands, of diligent labor, and of absolute patience. When they drank wine, it wasn't because they knew it was perfect by modern standards, but because they knew it was real as the shattered autumn after storms, as the carefully patched cotton cloak of the farmer, as the morning kitchen smoke lingering throughout the house. And that was enough. Medieval wine was not just an agricultural product, but a symbol of life, of accepting what nature bestowed, and of the deep connection between humans and the world around them.
When you imagine a monastery in the middle of winter during the Middle Ages, where stone walls are cold and candlelight flickers in the apothecary's kitchen, you will see a familiar item with a different meaning, a jar of wine placed on a high wooden shelf. This jar is not labeled with the year of production or the name of the vineyard, but with the name of a disease or a prayer for well-being, for deep coughs, peace for a weak heart, or dispelling winter chill. This is clear evidence of the important role of wine in traditional medicine and cuisine, far beyond the definition of a mere beverage. Wine had many applications in traditional medicine. In the meticulously handwritten medical texts from the 9th to the 12th centuries, preserved in monasteries throughout Europe, wine was carefully documented as an important base in preparing medicines and a powerful carrier. Monk physicians, who held most of the medical knowledge at that time, believed that wine had the ability to warm the body, promote blood circulation, and prevent cold-induced ailments. Wine itself did not heal diseases, but it had a miraculous ability to enhance the medicinal properties of herbs. For example, wine could make mint leaves release a stronger aroma, allow licorice root to penetrate the bloodstream faster, delivering valuable essences to every corner of the patient's body. Some common formulas included red wine combined with ginger and cinnamon, used to help malaria sufferers overcome severe shivering fits, repel cold, and restore strength. The patient would be spoon-fed small amounts of this warmed wine. White wine mixed with star anise, steeped with garlic. This mixture was used for massage when limbs were frozen or blood flow was blocked. The warmth of the wine and the heating properties of star anise and garlic would penetrate the skin, helping blood circulation, soothing pain, and gradually bringing a sense of warmth. Wine in treating joint pain. In cases of winter joint pain, especially those caused by rheumatism, wine was used as an internal warming layer. It was combined with other medicinal herbs, such as devil's claw or willow leaves, forming decoctions or suspensions, helping the body absorb the medicine better, softening tendons and relieving pain. Wine in funerals and during epidemics, disinfectant and odor masker. The role of wine was not limited to healing the living. It also had a special significance in the solemn rituals of death. In medieval funerals, when bodies needed to be prepared before burial, red wine was boiled, then soaked into clean cloths to wipe the body of the deceased. This act not only served as a rudimentary disinfectant, helping to prevent rapid decomposition, but also had the more important effect of masking the smell of the final days, the smell of illness, of death, bringing respect and cleanliness to the corpse. The strong, warm scent of wine, even for a short while, somewhat soothed the atmosphere of mourning. In the 14th century, when the Black Death, the Black Plague, spread across Europe, plague doctors often wore bird-shaped masks and carried a flask of wine at their hip. They used wine to rub their hands, clean off dirt and pathogens, although they didn't know about bacteria at the time, and disinfect their instruments before touching patients. Sometimes, in the most desperate moments, they would also take a small sip, not necessarily to seek comfort, but to hope that the wine would help them avoid infection, a necessary belief to face imminent death. Ancient medicine, with limited knowledge of microorganisms, did not know about the existence of bacteria or viruses.
but they knew that wine had a heating property, and heat, according to their beliefs, had the ability to dissolve bruises, dispel wind, and clear blockages. They believed that wine, with its warmth and penetrative ability, could repel bad humors and maintain balance in the body. Therefore, they believed that wine kept people closer to life, as a part of self-defense against invisible dangers. Wine was also used in cuisine. It was said, healing with taste, saving with warmth. Wine was not limited to the apothecary's room or medical rituals, but also entered the kitchen, becoming an indispensable part of therapy through food. In medieval cuisine, wine was used to regulate the properties of food and enhance its health-restoring capabilities. It regulated food properties. Seafood, considered cold and fishy, was often roasted with red wine and rosemary to warm the body and aid digestion. Wild game, often tough and dry, was stewed in wine mixed with cinnamon to tenderize the meat, make it easier to chew, and provide warmth to the body. Enhancing health for the sick. Dishes for those recovering from illness always had a final drop of wine before serving, like a ray of sunshine through the mist, a silent wish for health. Dry bread was often dipped in wine mixed with honey as a breakfast for those with weak hearts, believed to provide quick energy and warm the body. Oatmeal porridge was given a little hot wine to aid easier digestion and warm the stomach. At cold weather dinners, vegetable soup could be drizzled with wine before eating to warm the dish from within. At monastery banquet tables, wine was not just poured into glasses to drink. It was used to moisten millet seeds before cooking, making the dish richer. Drizzled over baked goods to enhance flavor and moisture, and became an excellent sauce for roasted herring or poultry. Each mouthful, according to belief, was a warm mouthful, and every dish prepared with wine was a silent prescription, a delicate combination of nutrition and therapy. In aristocratic feasts, wine provided the base for elaborate roasted dishes. Wine-marinated chicken was steeped overnight and roasted over glowing coals. Stewed pork was marinated overnight and cooked for many hours. And vegetables were cooked in wine mixed with herbs. No one called these dishes medicine, but everyone who ate them felt healthier, a refreshing sensation spreading throughout the body. This was because wine, according to their belief, was a bridge between the body and food, a warmth spreading in the stomach, a gentle touch to sluggish blood vessels. It not only provided nutrients, but also brought comfort and relaxation, helping the body to recover itself. In every meal of old, wine was present not just as an ordinary beverage, but as a fire amidst a cold feast, warming the space and the people. It was the soft sigh of relief from someone who had just recovered from illness, the subtle comfort bestowed by nature. Wine, in that ancient world, was an indispensable part of medicine, of cuisine, and of the belief in the harmony between humans and their natural world. It was a song of survival, sung through every drop of wine, every dish, and every warmth spreading throughout the body. Spiced wine and medicinal wine, the Hippocras and rose wine recipes. When you step into a room where the scent of herbs never fades, you'll realize that wine here never stands alone. It carries the taste of cinnamon, nutmeg, star anise, a hint of rose, and a touch of warm, dried ginger. It's not just a drink, but a medium for herbs to speak, for pain to be soothed by sweetness and warmth, and for people, if only for a moment, to feel lighter, brighter, more peaceful. Hippocras, the elixir of vitality. In the ancient medical handbooks of 13th-century monks, there's a meticulously recorded recipe for a special wine called Hippocras. It wasn't meant to be drunk to intoxication, but rather as a precious medicine used to strengthen the heart, warm the blood, and dispel deep cold from the very bones. Red wine was gently simmered with fragrant dried cinnamon sticks, a few pungent cloves, and sun-dried orange peel, which released its essential oils. To mellow the wine's astringency and add warmth, a touch of sweet forest honey and a few crushed black peppercorns were added. The entire mixture was then carefully filtered through a thick cloth bag, known as Hippocrates' sleeve, a name that evoked its essence and medicinal properties. Each batch of Hippocras had its own unique character. This was because the aroma of herbs varied each season. Honey from different regions had distinct sweetness, and more importantly, each monastery preserved its own unique secret regarding temperature, simmering time, and even whispered prayers during preparation. This is what made each jar of Hippocras sacred and unique. This type of wine was not for everyone. It was only given to those with weak pulses, those recovering from illness, or those preparing for a challenging journey. They sipped small amounts, slowly feeling the warmth spreading in their chest, as if a small fire was igniting from within. Rose wine, the fragrance of gentleness. In contrast to the warm and strong Hippocras, rose wine was much more delicate and gentle. This drink was favored especially for women and children with sensitive stomachs. Each year when the May rose petals began to bloom, the freshest, purest petals were carefully picked and then steeped in pure white wine. This mixture was sealed in traditional earthenware jars, placed in a cool, shaded spot, away from harsh sunlight. After only about a week, the wine would turn a captivating pale pink and release a refreshing aroma like an early summer morning, reminiscent of morning dew clinging to the petals. Rose wine was not meant to be drunk quickly. It was often mixed with warm water, sipped slowly to fully appreciate its pure flavor. It even had many other uses in monastic life, used to wipe the foreheads of those suffering from sunstroke, or soaked into a cloth and placed on the wrists of insomniacs, helping them find peaceful sleep. In some places, rose wine was also used as a mouthwash for sore throats, or lightly sprayed on clothing during mourning periods, as a subtle fragrance to soothe sadness and bring a sense of tranquility. Each monastery had a small private corner reserved for such special wines. They were not displayed prominently, but quietly nestled on old wooden shelves next to jars of dried herbs and worn prayer books. Wine, now, was not just wine. It was a means to connect people with nature, with healing, and with rare moments of peace in life. How did medieval people eat, preserve, and serve wine at meals? Imagine yourself stepping into a dining hall where the table is already set. There you won't find glittering crystal glasses or elaborate French-style stemmed goblets. Instead, you'll see rustic wooden cups, simple earthenware pitchers, and occasionally plain pewter chalices. Each piece is darkened by the marks of time. The rim of the cup might be uneven, the bottom slightly tilted, but no one complains, for they came here to drink, not to display wealth or glamorous appearances. Wine was poured from large, heavy earthenware pitchers. The hand of the pourer would always pause for a moment, glancing around to identify who was the head of the table, who was the honored guest, and who was the servant. Each social rank would receive a different amount of wine, and each cup poured was like a silent greeting, showing respect and hierarchy. Notably, at aristocratic dining tables, the wine pourers were meticulously trained. They never let a single drop of wine fall onto the table. With utmost care, they held the pitcher with both hands, tilted it slowly, and bowed slightly, as if performing a solemn, respectful ritual rather than a mere act of service. Medieval wine was typically drunk at a warm temperature, neither freezing cold nor boiling hot like other beverages. However, if it was a scorching summer day, people had their own way of cooling the wine. Wine pitchers would be carefully tied with rope and slowly lowered to the bottom of a deep well, left to soak for several hours until the wine was cool enough, offering a refreshing sensation like a gentle breeze on a hot afternoon. Conversely, in regions with heavy snowfall, wine pitchers would be buried in fresh snow, then brought up when the fire was blazing in the great hall, ready for a cozy feast. Wine was never drunk alone. It was always served with bread, salted meat, or roasted fish. A sip of wine helped cut through the saltiness of the meat, softened dry, hard pieces of bread, and warmed the throat after enjoying cold cuts. During large meals, when everyone raised their cups together, the clinking of glasses was subdued, rich, and brief. It wasn't a cheerful, boisterous sound, like in modern feasts, but more like a silent promise that we share this food, this time, and this wine. At these feasts, the elderly often drank slowly, savoring each bit. Children drank very little, just enough to taste the flavor. Servants were only allowed to drink last, and those who carried sorrow in their hearts always chose to drink in silence, letting the taste of the wine soothe their souls. Wine at medieval meals was not the centerpiece, but rather like a soft background melody. It was quiet, just enough to remind everyone that someone had painstakingly grown the grapes, pressed them, and patiently waited through the winter just to pour them a meaningful glass of wine.
Claret, tears and sweet nectar of war. When you step into a late 13th century afternoon at the port of Bordeaux, the air is filled with the smell of sea salt, damp wood, and the sweet aroma of fermenting fruit. English sailing ships with towering masts and proud three-lion flags are anchored thick in the harbor, alongside French sailing ships bearing fleur-de-lis banners. Porters hustle, their backs drenched in sweat, carrying heavy wooden crates, not gold or jewels, not silks or velvets, but carefully packed barrels of wine. This is claret, a name derived from the French claret, a pale red wine, light, fresh, and not at all harsh. Far from the deep red wines we know today, claret was clearer, almost a pale ruby, and notably, it could be drunk young, just a few months after aging. At that time, Bordeaux was part of the English crown's dominion, and Bordeaux wine, especially claret, had become a vital commodity linking the two sides of the English Channel, despite all political upheavals and wars. The 100 Years' War, lasting centuries between France and England, was a tragic epic of land, taxes, and claims to the throne. But even as swords clashed across the continent, ships carrying claret braved the waves, the wine flowing ceaselessly. Amidst tense negotiations, or even when brief truces were signed, the English still demanded familiar barrels of claret as an indispensable condition. Claret was not just a drink, it had become a language, a strange connecting thread that transcended declarations of war and the clang of swords. In 14th century tax records, it is still clearly documented. The number of claret barrels transported from Bordeaux to London each year amounted to hundreds of thousands of liters. Merchants enjoyed privileged bulk purchasing, even tax exemptions if loyal to the English crown. This created a complex trade network where neutrals or even double agents could exist and thrive. Guy de Montaigne, a wine merchant of Bordeaux origin, was one such person. His father had grown rich thanks to claret under the protection of the Duke of Aquitaine, English. Guy grew up with the scent of grapes and the jingle of coins. He didn't care much for politics, only that his wine had to reach London. Under the guise of neutrality, Guy established secret relationships with both French and English officials. He bribed border guards, shared confidential information about rival shipments in exchange for the safety of his claret barrels. "War is an opportunity, Monsieur Guy," an English customs official once told him in a clandestine tavern in Gascony. "Your claret is the only thing that makes English nobles forget the smell of blood." Claret appeared in every corner of society at the time. It was present in magnificent royal banquets, where kings like Edward III of England or Charles V of France would raise claret goblets together, perhaps with forced smiles, as they discussed impending wars. It was present at aristocratic weddings, where claret was likened to new blood, connecting two families and their aspirations for a peaceful future. On the tables of knights before battle, claret was poured into pewter goblets, its pale pink light reflecting the campfire glow. Sir Callan, a young English knight from Yorkshire, always carried a leather flask of claret with him. He believed that a sip of claret before battle would soothe fear, bring clarity, and a touch of strength from distant Bordeaux. "It makes me remember sun-drenched vineyards, not mud and blood," Calin once told his close friend as they sipped wine together on the night before the bloody Battle of Poitiers. Claret was even found in supply barrels sent from France to England right in the middle of the war. This demonstrates its unique role as a silent diplomatic bridge. Monasteries also played an important role in preserving and distributing claret. At St. Martin Abbey near Bordeaux, Abbot John Luke was not only a cleric but a wine expert too. He oversaw the aging of the wine, ensuring the quality of special shipments, sometimes for French lords, sometimes for English trade delegations. For John Luke, wine was a symbol of life, and trading it, even during wartime, was a way to maintain some order and hope. Claret was widely popular because it was easy to drink. Less tannic, low in alcohol, this wine was perfectly suited to the cold, damp climate of the British Isles, where stronger wines were often harder to digest. It was also a perfect complement to the typical meals of the time: charred roasted meat, rich smoked fish, and hard bread. A sip of claret would cut through the saltiness, soften the bread, and warm the throat after a piece of cold meat. Claret was even diluted with water for daily table wine, especially for women and children, or warmed with herbs like cinnamon and ginger to become a simple version of Hippocras, helping to warm the body on bitter winter nights. There was a famous saying at the time: "Claret is the diplomat in a wooden bottle." It didn't say much, it didn't deny anything. It just quietly flowed smoothly across borders, city walls, and enmities. Amidst centuries of war, wine still drifted through the waves, poured into rough wooden goblets of both French soldiers and English nobles. Arthur Finch, an English mercenary who was wounded and imprisoned in a French fortress, experienced this firsthand. During his captivity, he was served humble meals along with claret. At first, he found it unpleasant, but gradually, the familiar taste of this wine soothed his loneliness and homesickness. One night, while drinking claret in silence, he saw a French officer also sipping wine at the opposite table. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but in that moment, claret created an invisible bond, a tacit understanding that they, though enemies, shared one thing in common: a love for this wine, light as twilight. Wine, especially claret, became an indispensable part of the human psyche in wartime. It was not just a drink, but a symbol of life, of fragile hope. For soldiers, a glass of claret could be the last source of comfort before facing death, the taste of peace in a brief moment. For ordinary people, it was a reminder of abundant harvests, of peaceful days gone by, and a promise of a brighter future. Claret, with its pale ruby color and pleasant taste, transcended its role as a commodity. It proved that even amidst the most brutal conflicts, humans still find common ground, invisible connecting threads. And then, at some point, even enemies could sit at the same table, simply because they shared a love for a wine as light as twilight, a symbol of harmony amidst the storms of war. This is proof that no matter how stratified society may be, or how brutal war may become, the simple values of life, like a good glass of wine, still have the power to connect and soothe the human soul.
The art of winemaking, cellars, oak barrels, and the secret of time. When you step down into a medieval wine cellar, you'll immediately feel the difference compared to modern cellars. There's no blinding electric light, only flickering candles casting shadows on damp stone walls and low vaulted ceilings. The scent of earth, oak, and fermenting wine intertwine, creating an atmosphere both sacred and mysterious. This is where time slows down, where drops of grape juice are patiently transformed. Medieval wine cellars were typically built deep underground, utilizing the stable temperature and humidity of the earth. Thick stone walls, sometimes carved directly from the heart of a mountain, helped maintain a cool environment year-round, ideal for aging and preserving wine. There were no complex temperature or humidity control systems. It was the skill of the builders and the favor of nature that created the perfect conditions. In large monasteries or noble castles, wine cellars could be as vast as a labyrinth, with hundreds of oak barrels stacked high, reaching beyond sight. Each barrel was its own world, holding the potential of different grape harvests. The light from torches or oil lamps was just enough to illuminate the path, making every visit to the cellar an exploration into the earth, where the secrets of time were slowly being revealed. Brother Anton, an old monk at Cluny Abbey, dedicated his entire life to the wine cellar. His hands were calloused from carrying heavy wooden barrels, his face etched with the wrinkles of age and patience. He didn't need thermometers or hygrometers. He sensed the temperature through his skin, the humidity through the scent in the air. "Wine is like a human being," he often told his young disciples. "It needs silence, darkness, and time to mature." Oak barrels were the heart of the medieval wine aging process. More than just containers, oak barrels were an indispensable part of shaping the wine's flavor and structure. Oak wood, especially French or English oak, was carefully selected, split into staves, and assembled using traditional techniques without glue or metal nails. It was the tiny pores on the wood's surface that allowed a small amount of oxygen to permeate, helping the wine breathe and gradually develop complex flavors. During aging, the wine would absorb compounds from the oak, imparting subtle notes of vanilla, caramel, or spices. Depending on the type of wood, the age of the barrel, and the aging time, each batch of wine would have its own personality. Coopers were true artisans. Their skills were passed down from generation to generation. They knew how to select wood, how to bend each stave with fire and water to create perfect, tight barrels that still allowed the wine to interact with its environment. Pierre Le Tonnelier, a renowned cooper in Burgundy, was proud of every barrel he created. He believed that each stave had a soul, and it would transfer a part of that soul into the wine. "The barrel is not just the wine's home," Pierre said, stroking the smooth surface of a newly finished barrel. "It is a companion, helping the wine tell its own story."
Without complex analytical technology, determining when the wine was ripe relied entirely on the experience and intuition and patience of the winemakers. They tasted the wine regularly, sensing changes in flavor, consistency, and color. The aging process could last several months or even several years for more special wines, stored for important occasions. This was not a rushed industry. Everything proceeded slowly, according to the rhythm of nature and the accumulated experience over generations. Patience was key. A bad batch of wine could ruin an entire year's labor, while a successful batch could bring fame and wealth. The wine cellar contained more than just barrels of wine. It was also a place for hushed stories. Monks often used wine cellars as hiding places during wars, protecting valuable documents or even people from looting soldiers. Secret meetings between lords or political conspiracies sometimes also took place in the dim candlelight of the wine cellar, where the silence and the scent of wine could help conceal whispers. It is said that during an English army raid on a French monastery, Brother Anton and his disciples hid in the deepest recess of the wine cellar. They held their breath, listening to the sound of horses' hooves and shouts above. In the darkness, to soothe their fear, they shared a little aged wine together. Its sweetness and warmth brought them an unusual sense of peace amidst the tense atmosphere. Medieval wine cellars were not just places for wine production. They were a symbol of perseverance, of craftsmanship, and of faith in the power of time. It was where simple drops of grape juice were transformed into an essence, carrying the story of the earth and sky, of people, and of a turbulent era. When you stand on the ancient walls of Rome on a winter night in the late 4th century A.D., the biting cold doesn't come from the wind, but from the loneliness and anxiety deeply ingrained in every stone. The faint moonlight is just enough to cast long, ghostly shadows of watchtowers and ruined statues. Rome, the eternal city, once the heart of a vast empire, now bends under the weight of time, incessant invasions, and inevitable decline. On Watchtower number 7, part of the Aurelian walls, a guard named Marcus Flavius stands watch. He is not a brawny warrior like the Roman monuments. Marcus is only 25. His lean frame dwarfed by heavy armor, his face marked by weariness, and his deep blue eyes constantly scanning the pitch-black night. He has been here, on this wall, through thousands of winter nights, each night a struggle against the cold, boredom, and invisible fear. Marcus's life is a long series of military duties. He comes from a small village in Umbria, where lush vineyards stretch under the sun. Memories of the scent of damp earth and his mother's laughter during the grape harvest still linger in his mind. But those memories are now overshadowed by the smell of rusty iron, sweat, and constant fear. Rome is in a state of chaos. Barbarian tribes constantly harass the borders, and even within the city, power struggles are ceaseless. Every strange sound in the night, every shadow flitting beneath the wall could be a harbinger of a sudden attack. Tonight is particularly cold and still. Marcus feels every muscle in his body freezing. His breath thickens into white mist in the air. His hand grips his spear tightly, but his mind drifts to his distant home. He remembers his father, who taught him how to make wine from the family vineyards. His father often said that wine was the blood of Mother Earth, carrying the strength and soul of ancestors. In his thick leather and iron armor, further covered by a coarse woolen cloak, Marcus carries a small secret. A small leather flask hidden in a secret compartment of his armor right next to his heart. It is not water or medicine, but wine. A simple red wine, made from grapes he himself harvested during the last season at home, before he was forced into military service. His father had secretly aged it and given it to him on the night he left the village. "Take this with you, my son," his father whispered. "It will remind you of where you belong and what you are fighting to protect." That flask of wine is Marcus's most precious possession. More than a weapon or a piece of jewelry, it is a bridge to his old life, to his family, to the lost peace. He doesn't drink it often, only on the loneliest nights, nights when fear and despair almost swallow him whole, does Marcus quietly pull out the flask, uncork it, and take a deep breath. The scent of ripe grapes, of earth, of sunshine, and the wind of his homeland immediately fills his nostrils, dispelling the damp, metallic smell of Rome. Tonight is one such night. Rumors of a major attack from the Goths have spread throughout the camp. Tension envelops every soldier, making even restless sleep a luxury. Marcus knows that tonight Rome might be tested once more. He gently pried open the stopper of the leather flask. A dark red drop of wine, like blood, slowly rolled onto his palm. He raised it to his nose, taking a long inhale. The aroma of violets, of berries, and a familiar hint of earth. He took a small sip. The wine was slightly tart, then turned sweet, a warm sensation spreading down his throat, dispelling the cold and anxiety that tormented him. This was not the wine of lavish feasts, but the wine of farmers, of hard work, and of family love. It was his father's promise, a reminder that he was not alone. He knew he couldn't hold out much longer. He needed something to resist. In a moment of despair, he suddenly remembered the wine flask. A crazy idea flashed in his mind. When the two remaining Goth soldiers charged at him, Marcus unexpectedly stepped back, his hand quickly pulling the wine flask from his armor. With a decisive movement, he uncorked it and threw the dark red liquid directly into the face of the nearest soldier. Though not causing injury, the strong smell of wine and the surprise made the Goth soldier flinch, stumble back a step, and rub his eyes. That moment was enough. Marcus seized the opportunity, using his last ounce of strength to lunge at the other enemy, ramming his shoulder hard into him. Both collided with the city wall's railing, then tumbled down below. The Goth soldier's scream was muffled as he hit the ground. Marcus, more fortunate, managed to cling to a crevice in the stone, but his hands were scraped and aching. He heard the alarm horn blare from another watchtower. His skirmish, though brief, had been enough to alert the other soldiers. The pounding footsteps, the shouts of officers echoed along the wall. Reinforcements were coming. Marcus pulled himself up, gasping for breath. He looked down below, where dark figures were melting into the night. He had succeeded. He had defended his watchtower, and more importantly, he had defended Rome. He looked at the wine flask in his hand. Half of the wine had spilled out, but a portion remained. He took a final sip. The wine now tasted not only of grapes, but of survival, of courage, and of a promise kept. It was no longer the wine of memory, but the wine of victory. The next morning, as the sun rose, the bloodstains on the city wall were still fresh. Marcus was commended for his brave actions. He never told anyone about the secret wine flask. It remained his and his father's private secret. From that night on, Marcus no longer felt the invisible fear engulfing him. He knew that no matter what danger he faced, he still had a small flame within, something to fight for and to cling to. Wine flasks hidden in armor, sips of wine hastily taken in the dark, or drops of wine poured onto wounds became an indispensable part of the lives of Rome's city guards. They were not just drinks to quench thirst or warm the body. They were a source of comfort, a symbol of life, of fragile hope in the darkest hours. It was a reminder of home, of family, of what they were fighting to protect. It was proof that even within a warrior, a hardened soldier, there still exists a deep yearning for beauty, for peace, and for a life without war, a life where they could freely enjoy a glass of wine under the sun, not in the cold darkness of the city wall.
Hildegard von Bingen, the breath of the soul in a 12th century drop of wine. When you step into the scriptorium of Rupertsberg Abbey, a serene and solemn atmosphere envelops you. The warm candlelight illuminates the dark parchment where a woman's script flows smoothly, gracefully, like a breath, like an unending river of knowledge. These are the writings of Hildegard von Bingen, an extraordinary figure of the 12th century. She was not only a devout nun, but also an eminent physician, an inspiring poet, a talented musician, and a profound theologian. Her life is a vivid testament to the intermingling of faith, science, and art in the Middle Ages. Hildegard was born in 1098 into a minor noble family in Bermersheim, in the Rhine-Hessen region of the Holy Roman Empire. From a young age, she displayed special abilities, which she called visions, radiant lights, and sacred voices. At 8 years old, Hildegard was sent to Disibodenberg Abbey to study under the tutelage of a recluse named Jutta. Here she was educated in scripture, music, and rudimentary natural medicine. She spent her youth contemplating the Bible, studying herbs, and discreetly and reservedly recording her visions. After Jutta's death in 1336, Hildegard was elected abbess. From then on, her talent and intellect began to flourish. She not only led the abbey, but also wrote magnificent works on theology, Scivias, medicine, physica, and causae et curae, and music, Symphoniae Harmoniae Celestium Revelationem. Her works reveal a comprehensive vision of the cosmos, a deep connection between the divine, nature, and humanity. Hildegard believed that everything in the universe was created in harmony and with purpose, and that humans could find healing and balance through understanding and utilizing natural elements. Among her hundreds of handwritten notes, a particularly important section was dedicated to wine. She described in detail red wine, white wine, various herbs, and most importantly, the blending of body and soul in the healing process. For Hildegard, wine was not merely a drink, but a miraculous medium, a tool bestowed by God for humans to care for themselves. Hildegard von Bingen believed that wine, when used correctly and in moderation, was a powerful purifying and restorative agent for the body. She viewed the human body as a small garden that needed care, balancing its humors, bodily fluids, and energies. Illness arose from this imbalance, and wine, with its warming properties and ability to transmit, could help restore that harmony. She described how to infuse wine with various herbs to create specific medicinal wines. Sage-infused wine, salvia. Hildegard considered sage as an warm and dry herb, capable of cleansing the body, reducing bloating, and improving digestion. She instructed infusing dried sage leaves with white or red wine, letting it cool, and drinking small sips after meals to cleanse the digestive system. Burdock root infused wine, arctium. Burdock was described by her as having the ability to draw toxins from the body. Burdock root-infused wine was used for skin diseases, boils, or liver problems. Anise seed-infused wine, anisum. Anise seeds were used by Hildegard to improve respiration, reduce coughs, and soothe the stomach. Anise-infused wine was often drunk warm, especially in winter, to keep the body warm and alleviate cold symptoms. She particularly emphasized the role of wine in alleviating fevers and reducing inflammation. She wrote about fevers being calmed by white wine mixed with honey and bay leaves. This mixture, when drunk warm, was believed to lower fever, induce sweating, and repel illness. Honey provided energy and antibiotic properties, while bay was believed to have soothing and purifying qualities. For Hildegard, medicine was not just about treating the physical body, but also about touching the soul. She believed that many illnesses stemmed from mental imbalance, from sadness, anxiety, and isolation. In a profoundly humane letter to a count suffering from severe depression, she not only prescribed herbs, but also sincerely advised, "Drink a warm sip of wine every morning before the sun is high." This advice was not just about the physical effects of wine. It was a message about embracing the new light of the day, about finding warmth from within, and about a small ritual to start the day with hope. That warm sip of wine, she believed, would help calm the blood and purify the mind, paving the way for light and joy to permeate. For Hildegard, wine was not a means to forget pain or harsh reality, but to remember one's body, to feel life flowing in the veins. She wrote, "When wine touches the lips, the soul knows it is alive." This quote encapsulates her philosophy of the intimate connection between matter and spirit. Wine, when drunk with awareness and gratitude, can become a bridge between the finite body and the eternal soul, helping people realize the value of life and themselves. And so, through her skilled hands and compassionate heart, wine did not simply become a physical remedy. It also became a silent prayer, a connection to the Creator through the gifts of nature. It became a melody without sound, yet full of feeling, woven from taste, color, and the warmth that spread through the body, helping people find peace in their souls. Legend has it that during the years when malaria ravaged the Rhine Valley, spreading death and terror throughout the region, abbeys, including Rupertsberg, became havens of refuge and healing. The nuns, under Hildegard's guidance, bravely confronted the epidemic. They had no knowledge of bacteria or viruses, but they had unwavering faith in natural remedies and boundless compassion. In that difficult time, Hildegard directed the nuns to use a special medicinal wine boiled with fennel seeds and horse chestnut bark. Fennel seeds were known for their warming properties and ability to soothe the digestive system, while horse chestnut bark, believed to contain anti-inflammatory compounds, was believed by Hildegard to combat the noxious vapors causing fever. The nuns diligently prepared and distributed this medicinal wine to the sick writhing in fever, both within the abbey and in the neighboring villages along the Rhine. While many others succumbed to the malaria, a significant number of patients who drank this medicinal wine survived, creating strong belief in Hildegard's healing abilities and her remedies. This further solidified her reputation as a prophetess and a divine physician. Hildegard von Bingen's writings on medicine, especially wine medicine, were widely disseminated and profoundly influential. Later, physicians and scholars of the 12th and 13th centuries, including renowned medical practitioners from the Salerno Medical School, transcribed her words as truth. They believed in her principles of balance and the role of nature in healing. Her saying, "Wine
that, when guided by the hand of a saint, is light in a person's blood," became a maxim, symbolizing the healing power of wine when used with wisdom and reverence. Hildegard's influence was not limited to medicine. Her contributions to music, theology, and philosophy made her one of the most influential figures of the Middle Ages, far exceeding the usual role of a nun. She was recognized by the Catholic Church as a Doctor of the Church in 2012, a high honor for those who have made outstanding contributions to the Church's doctrine and knowledge. If you visit Bingen today, the small town nestled on the romantic Rhine River, you can still feel Hildegard's spirit. In the small museum next to the church, which houses many artifacts and information about her life and work, you will find a special porcelain wine pitcher. This pitcher is displayed as a replica, recreating the type of wine Hildegard once prescribed. Although only a copy, it evokes the image of a light, fragrant and warm wine, like the Latin lullabies she composed, echoing through time. Today, Hildegardian medicine is still studied and applied in many places, especially in Germany and Austria. Her herbal wine recipes have been recreated by wine and herbal producers, aiming to provide the health benefits she documented. These wines are not just consumer products, but also a bridge to the past, to ancient wisdom, and to faith in the power of nature. Wine, through Hildegard's lens, became a symbol of life, of hope, and of timeless wisdom. The story now gently closes. No need to carry it with you.
simply let it rest here. Its purpose was just to walk with you toward sleep. Whether you drift away now or linger a moment longer, that is enough. If this video offered you a moment of stillness or peace, please consider a gentle like, a soft subscribe, and share a comment. Your quiet presence helps this space continue. Thank you for listening. And now, may your night be peaceful.